All right, guys, today we got a fun one for you on the Project Raptor. What we're going to focus on today are wiring harness issues, and we had several of them. If you're starting to get some weird lights on your dash or just things aren't functioning, in our case, we had lots of them. Four-wheel drive didn't work, and I'll get into that into this series, but this might be an area you should check out, especially in this generation truck. The frame side wire harness is extremely exposed. Ford changed this on the next generation truck, thankfully, but I'm going to show you the issues I had and how I went about fixing it. Project Raptor is coming along. I'll be talking more about these wheels and tires and suspension and other things coming to address the rust here soon. But today we're going to focus on this little ditty, the wire harness. And I had a mess with this thing. And you can see how exposed the wire harnesses are on this generation truck. I don't like it, especially in a truck made for off-road, but I'm literally running it right off the production side of the connection points in the harness for the frame. But I'm gonna show you what I had to do, and thankfully it worked. What it's doing, put the key in the ignition, and it dies out. Try it again. Trying to give it gas, just dies out. Try it again. We're gonna address this wire harness loom and get this all fixed. We fixed all of the wiring issues. Now we just gotta make it look decent. This has been temporary just to drive it around and make sure everything is okay. So now we gotta fix this and put loom all the way up to the engine harness area. All right, and there is the wire harness all wrapped up and ran along the frame. I used the factory connection spots. I just zip tied them and reused those. It's really kind of tough to pop them, the Christmas tree out of the frame and it still be strong. So I preferred to just keep it there and then do 3 to 4 zip ties per location. The one thing that's always surprised me about the Gen 1 Raptor is I'm not a fan of how this main frame rail harness is ran right along the frame. It's always been an area that I've thought is super exposed for off-road, and they changed that around for Gen 2, but this is how it runs, and this is one more thing done on the Project Raptor. And just so you know, so for doing stuff like this, I would either solder and heat shrink, or if the wire was not broken but just had a little bit of shielding, I used some liquid tape and then wire loomed and actually taped the entire harness just to try to waterproof the entire thing. So it'll be as weather resistant as my plans. Also, take a look at those rockers. Rough shape. That's for another project down the road. So guys, I'm shaking my head on this one. And the reason I am is I thought I fixed a big problem, which was a wire harness issue. And unfortunately, I had to tear the entire sucker apart because I was getting corrosion. I spent a bunch of time, what I thought was good enough waterproofing on the wire harness that had the mice little chew marks. Wasn't good enough. I put brand new loom. I thought what was waterproof electrical tape, fixed all the spots with some liquid masking tape, but it wasn't good enough. I had an EVAP code, a P0466 code. You get online, this is pretty common with the 5.4 liter, and I thought for sure this is a purge valve. Pulled this sucker off the back of it. You can see it right there. That's the purge valve solenoid for the EVAP canister. Had to pull the whole intake off, went through the whole process, thought, yeah, that's probably it, 160,000 miles, that's the problem. Actually ordered one on Amazon, thought for sure that's my problem. Make a long story short, I pull this thing out. While doing it, I'm like, well, it's perfect time getting this all out. Let's clean the throttle body. Super nasty. I'll show you a photo of what that looks like. I don't know if it'll idle any better. It didn't idle bad anyhow, but I go through this thing, order one, and I'm like, you know what? Instead of just ordering, which is the whole point of doing this whole experiment, do diagnostics. I do a diagnostic test. I put 12 volts to that from the battery here, and I could hear the solenoid firing. I put my mouth on it, and you can blow through it. Take the electricity off. It's closed. On, open, and on and off. Cycle perfect. I'm like, I reconnected it, disconnected the line from the EVAP. If you get a suction on your finger, it's telling you there's a leak. There's no leak. I'm like, well, what the heck? I don't think that's the problem. So I start looking around, playing around, looked at fuses. Everything was good. And a bunch of guys start talking about wire harness issues. Here's the factory wire harness. I've already had some wire harness issues. I've already had to rebuild the entire section that goes down the frame. I'm like, you know, I'm gonna keep on the focus of EVAP stuff. So I got underneath, I went to the charcoal canister, which is right here. And if you can jiggle this around, it's loose. This thing's shot. Well, I start looking. I didn't like how this loom was wired in. I did these purple zip ties on purpose because I want them to stand out. I don't want them to blend in. So if I ever see one is missing, I know to keep my eyes on that. So that's for like my visual cue if I'm down here. So anyhow, I look down here and I noticed I didn't like how the loom looked. I'm like, man, I should just pop off this wire here to check and just see how the solenoid looks. Solenoid looked fine. I didn't run a test on it, but I'm like, you know, before the next step, I'm gonna do a continuity test. If you're not familiar with a continuity test, it's basically a test you can run from a voltmeter. And there's tons of videos on YouTube to show you, but basically I wanted to check both of these wires here, all the way through the wire harness and all the way up the front of the truck to make sure there's no break in the wire harness. Traced it back. It ended up being this harness, not that one over there, this one. And it was the fourth wire in from the top and the first wire in. I checked the fourth wire in, I put continuity on this side and I put it on that sensor. I didn't have continuity. I'm like, well, there's either possibly a break in the wire, or maybe there's an issue with the pin in the wire harness. Maybe there's an issue with the pin in the wire harness, or possibly I got a break in the wire. Well, make a long story short, I checked the other wire and that wire was fine. So that made me realize I've got a continuity issue in this wire harness. That's when, unfortunately, I had to rip the wire harness down again, completely separate the entire thing, ran out of my black electrical tape. I just did my Super 88 3M stuff. Man, that's phenomenal. I know the coloring's not great, but I just wanted to run that because it's the best electrical tape. I got to about right in here, about 5 foot from the vehicle. Here's some photos of the wire harness out of the loom, and you can kind of see how big of a mess this is. You don't want to do this if you have a choice. It's not very fun, and for the faint of heart. I couldn't believe my eyes. I thought I waterproofed this harness. I'm talking loom, electrical tape with overlap through whole thing, only one car wash, and there was green corrosion on like 20 different spots from where there's little tiny nicks in the wire. Sure enough, it's one of the wires to the EVAP sensor back there. More wire harness issues. Just popped this thing down and I thought I had everything fixed, but I found a few wires that had, let's see if you can see, cuts in it. I decided to cut that wire out and I'm going to solder in new wire and waterproof it. Going through the full harness. Not looking forward to this. It's going to be a bunch of work, but it's the right thing to do. So I fixed that sensor, went back, ran a continuity test, boom. Wire's good. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. Wire harness issue number 2. So at that point I decided I'm gonna tear this whole harness apart on the frame side and fix it correctly. I cut wires out, spliced wires with solder, waterproof, either heat shrink tubing, liquid masking tape, did it the correct way, rewire loomed it, retaped it, reconnected it. Here's the end result. Let's see if we got a check engine light on. Nothing. Good to go. No lights on. So if you're doing any electrical work, here's a shout out to 3M. If you can find this professional grade Scotch tape, I've tried the Super 33 and Super 88. This one's a little tougher to get, but the dexterity of this material and how nicely it sticks, I've never felt as the quality of a electrical tape that I've used in the past for other products like this. I highly recommend it. Not cheap, but worth it for projects like this. Boom. Wire harness fixed. I'm glad that's done, and honestly, it brought me back to doing some old projects when I was a kid and the satisfaction of fixing things. Please don't judge my mix of gray and black electrical tape. I do want to take a pause here and talk about one thing I find very interesting with this generation of Ford trucks. I've seen this on past Ford Raptors and F-150s. Look at how the frame has the wire harness running down the side of it. Do you notice that it would be very much in the line of path in an off-road environment? I'm not a fan of this. I've considered trying to find a way to rerun this, but what you're looking at is truly the factory style of how they run the wire loom on this generation of Ford trucks. If you notice, when they go to the second generation trucks, they change this, and for good reason. Good news is it didn't really cost me any money to fix this, just a crap ton of time and frustration. If I have another wire harness issue, I'm just replacing the entire thing. It's not that expensive, but that's gonna be a huge time burden to replace that down the frame. I think it's good to go. I've checked the waterproofness. I think we're good, but this is the importance. I'm talking little tiny nicks in the wire that was like no joke, and 1/10 of a millimeter, where you could just see just the tiniest split in the harness, in the wire, and you'd see green corrosion from it. So that showed me the sensitivity of the wire harness, at least for this vehicle. So anyhow, one more fix done, now on to the next one.